Hey ocean travelers around the world. This is St. Elmo's fire, ghostly blue flames that danced on masts. When storms sharpen the air, masts, wings and steeples light up with a calm blue glow that sailors once called a blessing, and science now explains. A square rigger moves through a night squall with sails drawn tight as drums. Rain drizzles, then spits, then sheets. Up high, where the wind thins into a hiss, blue flames settle on the mastheads like tiny candles that refuse to flicker. They do not run. They do not leap. They ride each spar as if the ship itself were sprouting soft stars. Far above another ocean, a jetliner passes between cloud decks at twilight. The cockpit windscreen gains a fine outline, as if a neon pen traced the glass. Static wicks on the trailing edge of the wings glow with short, steady streamers that keep their place even as the aircraft slices through air at cruising speed. The crew notes the halo, confirms the route around rough cores, and stays smooth. In a different place entirely, a mountain ridge lifts a snow line toward a hard gray sky. Climbers stop at a summit cross and hear a faint musical buzz inside the wind. Hair rises under wool caps, ice axes hum, blue-green light touches metal tips with the lightest kiss. 3 scenes, 1 glow. The same soft fire that once carried a saint's nickname now sits easily beside field meters and checklists. The promise is simple. This story traces how mariners and flyers met a quiet plasma, named it, learned it, and turned awe into calm action. St. Elmo's fire is the friendliest kind of plasma a storm can make at arm's length. In plain language, the air becomes just energized enough around sharp points that a gentle leak of charge lights it up. It prefers edges and tips, mastheads, antennas, steeple crosses, wing trailing edges, even a bell rope where tar has smoothed the fibers. The electric field rises around storms, the way tension rises on a rope when both ends pull, where geometry tightens the field at a point, a knife edge, a wire end. The air crosses a small threshold, molecules lose electrons. The air itself begins to glow. Lightning is a fast punch. This is a steady breath. Lightning blasts a path in millionths of a second and heats air until it slams outward as thunder. St. Elmo's fire lingers with low current, low heat, and that signature blue-violet tone that looks cool to the eye, like a flame made of dust. The name reaches back to St. Erasmus, St. Elmo, in sailors' mouths, a patron who, according to old stories, kept company with crews in hard weather. On dark decks, people spoke the name as a way to steady hands and share focus. The glow found nicknames wherever ships sailed: corpusants, holy fire, witches' lights. The meanings overlapped. None of them required fear. They pointed to the same practical truth. The sky's charge had climbed, and tall points were bleeding. That charge gently rather than letting it gather in a way that would invite a violent spark. Language and physics shook hands on wet timber. The setup begins inside clouds, where water drops, ice crystals, and hailstones collide by the millions. Those collisions separate charge. One region of the cloud becomes mostly positive, another mostly negative. The ground below responds as charges in soil, rock and water shift to face whatever the cloud carries, like iron filings lining up in a magnetic field. The invisible electric field between cloud and ground builds. It pushes into the air through everything that stands on the surface. Sharp points focus that field the way a magnifying glass focuses light. Focused field pulls electrons from molecules. The air at the tip becomes a quiet, tethered plasma. No bang, no flash, just a spell of soft shine. The signs are human. A faint hiss or buzz reaches the ear. The nose catches a clean, sharp smell, ozone and a pinch of nitrogen oxides. The skin hears its own tiny hairs rise. The glow arrives blue-violet, though on fog and spray it can look turquoise, as if seawater lent the sky a touch of color. Logs from ships and notes from towers turn the phenomenon from idea to texture. A watch officer in a rough Atlantic autumn once wrote, "Blue candles at the yardarm, rigging sang a thin note." A lighthouse keeper noted, "Rail hummed and spat tiny sparks." The lantern room glass stayed clean, the cross glowed. A piston aircraft pilot said after a night leg, windscreen edges turned blue. Static wicks sprouted tiny halos. Radios carried more hiss than usual. The ride stayed fine. A mountaineer told a park ranger, "The axe whispered in the gloves. Hair stood under the beanie. The ridge felt alive and careful." Each report lines up with the same physics: glow on points, sound like a hush of bees, a scent like fresh thunder's echo. Early mentions did not include equations. They kept a thread. Ancient and medieval writers sometimes marked fire on the mast during tempests, and sailors in port retold those sightings without drama. Pairs of lights, one on each mast, were counted as favor by some crews because they often appeared on stout, well-rigged ships that handled weather cleanly. Single lights took on different meanings in certain traditions. What mattered most was not prophecy, it was continuity. The same gentle fire that lingered on a 15th century yardarm now clings to a 21st century antenna tip, and in both centuries the lesson is identical. The sky carries energy, the point releases it steadily. Stay alert, carry on. During the age of sail, crews built habits around the glow. Some ships rang a bell slowly when lights appeared at the masthead, not as alarm, but as acknowledgement. Veterans taught new hands that a ship showing St. Elmo's fire had edges and bonds that worked. Charge was leaving in small, polite ways. A quick fact carries weight here. A glow on the mast could mean the rig was already acting as a lightning attractor in waiting, relieving stress before a larger event. Seasoned sailors read the light not as doom, but as data. The phrase they used meant storm nearby, ship sound. The road from kites and glass rods to lab benches and field meters turned the glow from rumor into repeatable experiment. Early experimenters learned that a point leaks charge better than a sphere. In dark rooms, needles bloomed with tiny brushes of light when connected to machines that mimicked storm fields. Later studies of corona discharge mapped where and when those brushes appear. Pictures captured the faint halo on wires and edges. Measurements showed which shapes invite gentle glow and which shapes invite sparks. That engineering migrated to docks and hangars. Rounded fittings reduced surprise. Smooth metal bonds prevented accumulation. Purpose-built leaky parts. Static wicks on aircraft, finials on masts, gave charge non-dramatic exits. The lesson traveled a designed path turned sky moods into quiet effects rather than loud accidents. Case after case at sea shows the same character. A steel research ship in the tropics rides along a squall line. Instruments note a falling barometer and veering winds. At the foremast, the weather vane wears a tiny cap of light. The VHF whip shows a blue brush at its tip. The bridge smells ozone and logs. Blue visible on mast and rail ends. Radios hissing intermittently. No drama follows. The ship slides out from under the strongest field, and the glow thins back into night. In colder waters, a wooden schooner under reefed canvas shows beads of light on yard ends, while the sea runs gray and lumped. The captain alters a point to give a thunderhead more space, and the helm stays steady. A coastal ferry near a tidal headland experiences a faint rim of blue along a fresh-painted rail. Passengers never notice through rain-streaked windows. The bridge crew handles antennas gently and calls traffic control with clear, calm voice. Ship after ship, decade after decade, the halo is read the same way. A reminder to give the sky room and to keep metalwork honest. Aviation brought fresh edges for the light to sit on. Propeller tips in early days grew small comets of glow and weather-built. Windscreen arcs showed as hairline neon that came and went. Radios crackled because the airframe shed charge less smoothly when clouds rubbed their fur along the metal. Static wicks changed that, turning wings and tails into gardens of safe exits. Bonding straps joined panels so the airplane lived as one conductor. not a mosaic of potentials. A jet crew passing near convective towers after sunset sees the edges of the glass sketched in violet, each static wick holding a small star at its end. The checklist does not change. Give the cores space, keep systems set, ride the smoother air. The glow is archived in the log as an observation, not a headline. On land, the same lessons hold. A mountain ridge concentrates field lines the way a ship's mast does. Climbers hear the thin buzz in ice axes and see blue on carabiners. A steeple cross in storm season can gain a calm beard of light. A lighthouse gallery rail whispers while the lens and glass sit clear. Volcanic rims, where ash plumes charge the sky with particle friction, sometimes host both St. Elmo's fire at hand level and violent lightning high above. A single note belongs here, for safety's sake. The halo is gentle, but it shares company with stronger events. That means stepping back from high points, lowering metal, and choosing shelter so the storm can pass without asking for a price. Lookalikes live nearby and deserve clean lines. Lightning races and branches, blazing white and demanding thunder. St. Elmo's fire stays put, clings, and hums. Aurora drapes whole skies in green, red, or purple curtains that breathe and ripple with geomagnetic dance. It does not hiss on a mast tip or smell like ozone. Bioluminescence swirls in seawater, and on wet sand at night, it blooms in greens or soft blues as footsteps or bow waves wake living light in the water, and it never hisses or gathers on metal. Ball lightning, rare and debated, floats free as orbs in a way that witnesses report with intensity, but little consistency. The halo of this story keeps to edges and prefers the company of charged storms, antennas and tall points. Sound and scent mark the event as clearly as light. A faint hiss becomes noticeable only when telephones pause and engines idle low. The buzz is not sharp. It is silky, like the far hum of insects. The smell, crisp and clean, echoes the nose's memory of a thunderstorm's first breath, or a copier room's sharp bite after a long job. Ears and noses often catch St. Elmo's fire before eyes do, especially in daylight, fog, or spray. Those signals tell hands to be deliberate around metal and to leave radios and masts alone until the sky relaxes. Hardware turns ghost light into a safety valve. On ships, bonding makes one ship out of many parts. Down conductors give lightning and lesser charges a tidy ladder to the sea. Masthead shapes reduce hotspots without preventing gentle bleed-off. On aircraft, static wicks dot trailing edges to drain charge into the slipstream without sparks. Bonded panels, doors and fairings settle at the same potential. The cockpit functions like a Faraday room, keeping big charges outside and letting small ones thin away. The glow becomes an indicator that the plan is working. The color carries its own story. Air is mostly nitrogen and oxygen. Gently energized nitrogen gives off light, nearest blue-violet, the shade that sits between royal blue and purple. Drier air often yields a sharper hue. Humid air can broaden the halo into a softer wash. Neon signs glow orange-red because neon is a different gas with different energy steps. If a viewer has seen the violet edge around high-voltage wires in a science demo or the purple-blue flicker when a bug zapper arcs, that family resemblance helps. No equations are required. Different gases sing different colors. Gentle songs mean gentle light. Old beliefs kept one thing emotionally right. Crews said two lights meant company and good luck. The calm translation is that sturdy, tall rigs on sound ships often showed the glow in ways that felt reassuring. Crews said a lone light could warn of trouble. The calm translation is that strong local fields can precede lightning. Caution is smart. Modern phrasing runs like this: not a bad omen, but a useful signal. Not a ghost fire, but a corona discharge. Not fate, but physics and attention. Cameras do not love the halo. It is dim, thin, and often drowned by rain streaks, motion blur, and the jumpy frame of a ship on a living sea. Long exposures catch edges, but smear detail. Stabilized sensors help. But the best record remains ordinary language, written soon after. Blue on mast tips, faint hiss, ozone smell, radios crackled. That one line lasts longer than many clips, and tells the story with perfect clarity. Practical behavior follows naturally. When blue rides the edges, hands stay off masts and antenna bases. People give metal a margin. Vessels steer wide of angry cores rather than cutting lines too fine. Radios are handled gently. Doors and hatches shut soft to avoid incidental sparks. On ridgelines, axes drop, bodies step lower, and small groups move toward sheltered contours. The glow itself does not hurt. It invites wise spacing and timing. It reduces surprise by announcing the neighborhood of larger events without making those events arrive. Culture does right by St. Elmo's fire when it treats the glow as detail, not jump scare. A book scene that mentions the hymn on rigging and the clean smell honors both the sailors and the science. A film that shows a cockpit rim growing blue while the soundtrack stays honest, wind wipers, clear voices, teaches as it entertains. A song that nods to candles on the yard, connects listeners to centuries of night watches without dressing the ocean in fear. The image endures because beauty and instruction share the same line. Where does the glow prefer to live? It shows up in storm alleys, where trade winds feed squalls that stack into lines. It appears along mid-latitude storm tracks that drag cold and warm air into spirals. It visits mountain ranges that scrape field lines into focus. It pays calls near volcanoes where ash plumes supercharge the air. It rides polar routes where dry air makes edges crisp. A mental world tour stops north of the equator in the belt where hot seas breed afternoon towers, jumps to a Midwest plain under anvil clouds, crosses to a winter North Atlantic low rolling with long fetch, then slides to a Mediterranean cape where thunderstorms find a favorite door from land to sea. A friendly science corner keeps the vocabulary light. Plasma is a state of matter where electrons move freely. Corona discharge is the quietest member of the electrical family that storms build. Streamers are faint filaments that may reach outward from a point when the field increases. Leaders are more organized, stepping pathways that build the route lightning runs. St. Elmo's fire sits in the corona zone, the almost that does not need to become anything louder. Field meters on decks or airfields measure the strength of that almost. Rising numbers tell people that attention belongs on tall points and timing. Space weather measures like the K-index sometimes change high-altitude electrical behavior, but they touch this story only lightly. The essentials remain a point, a field, a glow, a choice. The next chapter for this subject uses more sensors and more shared notes without changing the core experience. Field mills on buoys will continue to beam data that shows how storms raise and lower the electric room the ocean lives in. Aircraft logs can auto-flag corona events for weather modelers. Sailors, pilots, climbers, and keepers can contribute short entries to open databases with simple fields. Time, place, weather, where the glow sat, whether sound or scent came with it. Shared notes make storms safer and preserve the quiet grace of an old maritime habit. Observe, write, pass it on. Questions arrive often and can be answered cleanly. Is St. Elmo's fire dangerous? Not by itself. It is low current and low heat. It can precede lightning, which is dangerous, so it signals care. Does it mean lightning will strike? It increases the odds nearby, but it is not a guarantee. It is a heads up. Can it appear without clouds overhead? Strong winds over dry snow or dust can charge air enough for tiny halos. The classic show still loves storm edges. Why does it prefer sharp points? Fields concentrate at points, lowering the energy needed for air to glow. Can it happen at sea level and at cruising altitude? Yes, wherever fields rise and edges exist. Masts, wicks, steeples, ridgelines. The glow can sit. Postcards help the mind hold details without strain. A schooner's yard displays a neat row of bluish candles in rain. A deckhand glances up and smiles the way people smile at an inside joke. A glider wingtip at sunset earns a slim violet outline. The pilot lands, logs dim halo under cloud base, and adds nothing else. A volcano rim fills the upper sky with forks of lightning, while a ranger's antenna whispers and glows at hand height. A lighthouse lens gains a thin blue ring on a winter night. The keeper leans on the gallery rail and listens to the hum ride the wind. A ship's bell rope flickers with tiny snaps as a storm's last breath leaves the bay. Afterward, the rope is just rope again. The glow that chooses edges also chooses attentiveness. In a training program, tall ship cadets on first night watch see masthead candles and learn the unspoken lesson. Eyes open, notes steady, respect the hint. In a dry land relay station, technicians hear crackle on a door hinge and delay a climb because work and weather share one calendar. On a beach dune ahead of a squall line, grass tips show fleeting sparks in full dark. The safest move is to head off open crest lines and let the cloud parade by on its own schedule. A single rule fits everywhere. When the sky sends a quiet signal, quiet behavior is the right reply. Instrument designers learn from the halo by asking where it tries to appear on their own gear. If the casing of a field mill glows in testing, edges need rounding. If a sensor mast shows corona at a seam, a bond must improve. Turning a tool into a better window, not a tiny lamp, is the goal. That goal mirrors what shipwrights and airframe engineers have done for generations, smoothing paths so charge never pools into trouble. Color language can get fuzzy, so an everyday anchor keeps it clear. The glow sits closer to the purple end of a rainbow than to sky blue. It is the color of violet ink, thinned with light, the color of a candle held behind a thin blue glass. On fog, it spreads into a halo like a breath on a mirror. On crisp, dry air, it sharpens to a quill-fine edge along glass and wire. Memory holds that shade longer when tied to texture. A hum in the ear, a clean scent, a soft edge of light, hugging something pointed. Stories do not need to exaggerate the glow's motion. It rarely runs along lines like a lit fuse. It stays put, loyal to the geometry that hosts it, and rides any movement that geometry makes. A mast sways, so the light moves with the mast. A wing slices, so halos ride the wing. Across rocks, so the beard of light nods in the gale, showing that simple loyalty on screen or page delivers more wonder than any chase scene could. Curiosity asks whether people can touch it, as if a finger could gather a piece of sky. The best practice is to let the glow be. It is a signal to give metal extra margin until conditions ease. Folklore mentions sailors who reached and felt a tiny tick at a knuckle. Those tales end with a lesson that matches modern guides. No demonstrations during storms. The reward of this subject is not a stunt. It is a habit of reading weather calmly and acting with care. Citizen notes already suggest how climate shifts nudge the map of where the glow shows. In some places, humid seasons now run longer, softening halos into broader washes when they do appear. In other places, drier air sharpens edges and makes the glow easier to see at a distance. The phenomenon remains the same. Field plus point equals glow, but the background canvas changes. Collecting those changes with simple notes keeps the story honest and useful. The long arc bends back to the beginning. Sailors noticed, named and accepted. Scientists measured, modeled, and refined. Engineers built shapes that cooperate with the sky. Pilots and skippers added the halo to checklists. Not as alarm but as awareness, climbers listened for the hum and learned to value a quiet turnaround. Lighthouse keepers and tower techs made rules for ladders and doors when rails sing and edges shine. The glow is not a mystery that demands solving. It is a message that rewards paying attention. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really enjoy and want to fall asleep with ocean stories whenever you want. The sentence resumes its path, without a recap, because the night at sea does not pause for speeches. A container ship threads between cells, that look like dark mountains. The foremast's vane keeps its soft crown. The bridge team adjusts speed to time. A gap, and the vessel slides between curtains of rain into a pocket of open air. A tiny change in course saves hours of pounding and makes sleep come easier on off-watch bunks. The glow fades. The ocean returns to its usual black, and the lesson stays on the page where it belongs. Read, decide, move with care. The glow thins and thickens with weather, the way breath does with effort. In a harbor known for quick squalls, tug crews remember evenings when blue pearls perched on deck cleats while thunder walked the horizon like slow footsteps. The visual was soft, almost courteous. Deckhands kept gloves on, stayed off the tallest metal, and treated antennas like sleeping cats, respected, not disturbed. The harbor pilot who rowed a barge through that same line of storms later said to a trainee, "The sky gave a hint. The right move was simply to listen." The trainee did not forget. Years afterward, that same mariner would glance at a faint violet on a range marker and choose the wider channel without needing to be told. High above a coast where the land folds into cliffs, a small research plane skimmed under an anvil cloud to scan sea surface temperatures. The glass around the cockpit wore a thin electric script. It looked drawn by a patient hand. Static wicks shone like pencil erasers dipped in night. The pilot's voice stayed even. Altitude steady. Power set. Turn radius measured wide of the cell's heavy core. The plane slipped into clearer air, where the outline faded, as if erased with a soft cloth. The scientist in the right seat wrote a single sentence in a notebook. Corona visible on glass and wicks. Radios slightly hissy, air smooth. That note, read later by students who had never flown near storms, said more in one line than a dozen dramatic stories could say. On a lighthouse promontory, the gallery rail told a different class in the same language. Winter wind combed the headland so hard that spray flew backward off wave tops. The keeper checked fasteners, tightened a hinge, and paused as the metal sang. Blue tip lights appeared on the sharp ends of bolt threads. The cross atop the lantern room grew a small beard of light. The keeper did not stage a demonstration. The keeper closed the door, wrote the observation, and waited out the squall. When visitors asked months later whether the cross really glows, the answer came with the pace of tide. Yes, when the air turns electric, it glows a little. When it glows, steps should be deliberate, not bold. The phenomenon favors edges, but it also favors communities that pass habits forward. In a coastal town, elders teach younger fishers a rule about rod tips and railings when thunderheads drag their dark skirts over the bay. The rule is short. If a clean smell and a soft hiss arrive together, the day's work pauses. Boats raft farther apart. Rods lean under a roof. Conversation moves to the calm subjects that fill short waits, bait recipes, tides, the quality of last year's nets. When rain finishes its rattle and the electric charge drains back into quiet, the evening opens again. The rule is not a superstition. It is logistics informed by physics. Not every sighting is dramatic. Some are barely there. A hiker on a high plateau noticed blue fuzz on a metal water bottle's rim as an afternoon storm pressed down from the west. The fuzz looked like a breeze drawn in light. The hiker walked to lower ground, tucked the bottle in a pack, and watched the storm flatten the plateau into wet slate. In a city where steeples outnumber cranes, a passerby saw a faint blue trim on a church cross during a summer thunder shower and smelled air that seemed new. The observation lasted a handful of seconds and then was gone. The passerby would later read about St. Elmo's fire and nod, grateful for a name to match a feeling. Evidence also hides in the way machines behave when the blue appears. Radios grow raspy, compass repeaters can fidget, acoustic instruments that listen to water might add a whisker of noise to their graphs. Engineers who know this story design around that interference with bonds and filters, and crews who know it log the behavior without surprise. The blue glow, in this practical sense, is a banner hung by the atmosphere that reads systems may be fussier, until further notice. Patience pays. History gives the glow human faces. A page from a 17th century log mentions fires of St. Elmo at our topmasts, and goes on to list sail changes made to ease the ship. The writer does not worry about what the fire means beyond the simple fact that wind, water, and charge have arranged themselves in a particular way. A 19th century lightkeeper writes about stars at the rail ends during a gale and then worries about the oil supply the next day. A mid-20th century pilot, asked in an interview about his most memorable night flights, mentions a neon edge on the glass and a radio that sounded like it had a cold. The common thread is work done calmly under sky that sometimes hums. Science translates these pages into photographs and graphs without erasing their charm. In a lab, a fine wire connected to a high voltage supply plays host to a sliver of blue no brighter than a candle sigh. A spectrograph splits that blue into stripes. A fingerprint showing nitrogen's energy steps. A camera exaggerates the image so students can see what eyes struggle to hold. Then the lab turns the knobs a little higher, and violet brushes reach out from the wire like roots looking for soil. Those are streamers. Turn the knobs further, unplug safety, and soon a hot spark leaps, bright and noisy. That is no longer St. Elmo's fire's domain. Back the knobs down, return to the whisper, and a quiet halo sits again where points and fields meet. In field tests, a mast fitted with sensors shows the same pattern when real storms pass. Field strength rises. The first trickle of corona appears at sharp points. Meters climb, and then fall with the weather's breath. There is wisdom in admitting that some of the best evidence is still people speaking plainly. A mountaineer says, "The axe sang. We went down." A coastal captain says, "Blew on the rail, speed reduced." An airport line technician says, "Static wicks showed stars. We waited for the cell to move east before towing." A parent on a boardwalk says, "The flagpole glowed a little. We went for cocoa under the awning and watched the rain make the world shiny." Each sentence contains a decision. Each decision turns awe into action without turning beauty into fear. Maps help too. If a viewer were to lay pins where the glow most often appears, patterns would emerge. Pin lines would trace tropical convergence zones, where warm seas pump moisture and energy into the lower sky. Pins would mark coasts where sea breezes stack afternoon clouds into towers. Pins would dot mountain chains like the Rockies, the Alps, the Andes, where altitude and topography concentrate fields on ridgelines. Volcanic arcs would receive their share of pins, where ash charges the air like a wool sweater, fresh from a dryer. Pins would extend into polar regions where dry, cold air sharpens edges and lets a thin violet hold the eye longer, even when storms are less energetic. The map would not be complete, because human eyes and cameras do not stand everywhere at once. But the clusters would give students a real sense of where to look and when. Culture has carried the glow across centuries without making it a monster. Painters have suggested the halo as a thin line of light on a mast or cross, sometimes visible only if a viewer knows to look. Poets have used it sparingly, as detail rather than symbol. Musicians have borrowed its name to hint at long nights, work, and patience. Documentary films that treat the phenomenon well let the soundtrack carry truth, the hiss of charge, the patter of rain, the low talk of crews working checklists. They do not plaster on thunder when none belongs. They trust light to lead. Education at its best uses the glow to teach several subjects at once: weather, electricity, history, and safe behavior. A classroom unit can begin with a sailor's line from a diary, show a lab corona under glass, bring in a pilot via video who describes the cockpit outline in calm terms, and end with a checklist for what hikers should do when hair lifts and metal sings. The goal is to hand the next generation a single durable idea. Storms can be read, and reading them well leads to good choices that feel natural, not anxious. The halo also rests comfortably alongside bigger conversations about the sea and sky. A program about lightning safety benefits from a minute on St. Elmo's fire as a quiet cousin that announces a charged environment. A discussion about grounding and bonding on small craft fits the glow as a reason to keep metalwork clean and continuous. A museum exhibit about navigational instruments can set a compass near a mast model with a thin blue line painted on its tip to suggest the way charge finds edges. The more physical the examples, the easier the lesson sticks. On nights when the blue does not appear, the habit of watching for it still does good work. A sailor who knows where the light would sit if it came is also a sailor who knows where hands should not be during a storm. A pilot who has seen the outline once is quicker to notice subtle cues in cloud shape and radar texture that separate a benign shower from a bruising cell. A mountaineer who understands that an axe can sing will not confuse the thrill of a hair-raising ridge with permission to linger when the sky says move. The phenomenon becomes a way to tune senses even when the instrument is silent. There is a plain, satisfying reason for the color that blends art and science. The human eye at night prefers blue and green over red. Rods do not register red well in low light. Nitrogen's glow lives where eyes are still awake. That makes the phenomenon easy to see without taking the sky into harsh brightness. It also helps explain why the glow feels cool, even though the air at the tip of a mast is energized. The color whispers instead of shouting, and people's nervous systems respond gently to whispers. Many who have never seen St. Elmo's fire in person still carry its image because an elder described it at a kitchen table, or a teacher brought it into a lesson with a story. Those second-hand memories matter. They keep communities literate in the language of storms. They become tools, verbal life jackets, that anybody can wear. A person in a city far from open ocean might, on a day trip to a mountain, feel hair lift and remember a sentence heard years ago. When metal sings and the air smells clean like thunder, move down. Memory turns to motion. Motion turns to safety. The glow becomes a quiet actor in the lives of people who never expected to meet it. Practical engineering keeps evolving around all of this. Newer marine antennas use shapes that reduce hotspots without losing performance. Composite masts include embedded conductors to give lightning-defined routes without adding weight. Aircraft static wick materials keep flexibility in cold and survive UV longer. Small hiking beacons that talk to satellites now share storm warnings pushed from weather services that use field data from buoys and airports. Homes near ridgelines install surge protectors that treat the house like a small ship. One body, one potential, one clean path for surprise energy to take harmlessly into Earth. The glow is not the reason for any one of these upgrades, but it stands in the background like a calm auditor, reminding designers and users that edges matter. The subject invites a few last micro-stories before the narrative moves toward its promised wrap. A trawler, heading home under cobalt clouds, hears the rail buzz. The skipper calls for slow ahead and a wider sweep around the river mouth bar, trading 10 minutes of time for a smoother crossing. A pilot ferrying a small plane between coastal towns notices a violet hairline on the windscreen's corner, gives the one towering cell an extra 5 miles, and lands in a light rain that feels like relief rather than achievement. A hiker on a knife-edge ridge tastes that electric tang and watches the faintest glitter on a trekking pole tip. The hike becomes a lesson in turning back, and the view from below proves as good as any view from above. A lighthouse keeper on a remote island steps out at midnight, sees the lantern cross wear its little beard of light, and smiles at the old friend before stepping back inside to let the storm speak to itself. A lightning-fast tour of distinctions keeps curiosity tidy, without clutter. The glow does not burn fingers unless someone reaches foolishly into a high field and invites a tiny spark. That spark stings and educates, and wiser hands keep distance the next time. The glow does not crawl long distances. It sits but can appear on points across a whole ship or a skyline if the field is strong. It can happen over open water, over valleys, on city spires, and on aircraft in thin air. The common element is field strength, and something pointed nearby. It can arrive minutes before a storm's main event, or ride the storm's edges like fringe. It can hold for seconds, or linger for a whole squall's passage. It often resists cameras, but yields to good writing. At this stage, the recap arrives as promised, because tidy endings serve viewers as well as sailors. Sailors named the gentle blue a long time ago, and set it among their tools, not their fears. Science gave the glow a modern translation: corona discharge, a quiet plasma that clings to edges when the sky's invisible field grows strong. The senses read it: a cool blue-violet halo, a hiss or buzz like bees kept far away, a clean scent that tastes of thunder's first breath. St. Elmo's fire shows on mastheads, glass edges, static wicks, rails, crosses, and axes. It is not lightning, but it is a neighbor to lightning. It brings no harm by itself and arrives with useful advice. Give the sky room, treat metal kindly, and let designed paths do their good work. The halo turns myth into a steady practice. Watch, note, and choose well. The final landing is gentle and complete. What people owe the glow is simple: attention, respect, and a sense of shared craft. Learn the signs, trust the checklists, enjoy the beauty without turning it into a stunt. When the air sharpens and edges shine, step back from high metal, steer wise paths around the loudest clouds, and remember that storms speak a language anyone can learn. The last quiet fact sits where the story began, on the border between awe and explanation. The blue is the air itself, telling its secret with a soft light. It is there to be seen, not feared. It asks for nothing but a good witness and a calm reply. In that exchange, folklore meets physics, and both walk off the deck into the night together, easy and understood. On a research platform farther offshore, field scientists monitor buoys that read wind, waves, and the sky's electric mood. Their instruments mark rising fields as a squall line stiffens. Crew on deck see the first hints of violet at antenna tips. Radios carry a little extra hiss. The platform's lightning protection bonds have been checked 100 times. They do their job quietly. Data flows. The glow waxes, then wanes. The storm rains itself out in gray curtains and moves on, leaving clean air and a page of numbers that match what eyes and ears felt. The harmony between instruments and senses is the real story here. The halo is not a rumor. It is a measurement written in light. Somewhere else, a cargo ship rides the edge of a winter lull. The crew has settled into the steady rhythm of watch changes, coffee that tastes of salt air, and a horizon that wears a white seam. The bosun, who trusts habits more than heroics, walks the deck with a small flashlight and a patient gait. He pauses at a ground strap, touches it with the back of a gloved hand, and nods. No stray sparks, no loose hardware. Up above, masthead fittings wear that thin blue paint of charge. Inside the wheelhouse, the mate writes, glow visible on mast and rail ends, gentle hiss, minor radio crackle, course adjusted 5 degrees to give line of squalls room. The note could have been written 50 years ago. It still works because the ocean still works the same way. A ridge trail in late summer teaches the same lesson in a different font. Hikers move along a spine of rock and grass. The air grows close. Clouds gather without drama. Just a slow stacking of grays. One hiker hears a sound like a distant beehive, faint and high. Another catches a clean scent that seems to wipe dust from the nose. A trekking pole tip wears the thinnest outline of blue. No one panics. No one argues. The group turns downhill toward a bowl of trees, talking softly about the wild flowers that grew along the higher stretch. 10 minutes later, rain washes the ridge. The hikers sit under spruce and share a thermos. The memory they carry is not fear. It is the feeling of having heard a language and answered correctly. Quick fact: the human eye holds onto that blue-violet better at night. because rods like shorter wavelengths more than long ones. That is one reason the halo feels so visible after sunset, even when it is objectively faint. Another quick fact: the same glow is brighter for someone who has been in darkness for a while and almost invisible to someone stepping out from a bright cabin. This is why watch notes matter. Two people can be on the same ship and disagree about brightness simply because one came from a galley light and the other has been staring into night for an hour. The practical spin-offs of understanding St. Elmo's fire reach into corners that seem unrelated until they are not. On small sailboats, owners learn to keep metalwork bonded, lifelines, pulpits, rails, so that if charge has business aboard, it finds easy routes and no odd corners to collect in. On tall towers, climbers learn to read the tone of a guy wire under storm load and to back off when that tone is accompanied by a hiss that does not come from wind alone. On research drones, designers add tiny whisker-like discharge points to tips so radios stay clean. The glow is old, but its uses are fresh. A night train rumbles across a flat plain where the only high points are the catenary poles that hold the wires. A summer storm marches across the fields. Between flashes, the insulators on the poles show a necklace of soft blue beads. Minute coronas at the sharpest edges. Passengers reading paperbacks do not see it through rain-streaked glass. A rail electrician riding in a service car sees it and smiles because it says everything is doing what it's supposed to. He will later tell an apprentice, "Look for the blue on wet nights. If it's where you expect, you sleep well." When the subject turns to lookalikes again, one extra distinction helps newcomers. Photographs of aurora often show arches and curtains with structure, rays, folds, and movement that covers a huge chunk of sky. Photographs of St. Elmo's fire when they work show thin edges, dots on bolt threads, pencils of light at whisker points. The scale is the giveaway. One fills the heavens, the other hugs a fingertip of metal. Watch out for this. Long exposures can blur a seated glow and make it look like motion. A simple caption: "Long exposure of static wick glow keeps expectations honest." The soundtrack can carry unexpected detail. People who work on decks sometimes describe a note in the hiss, like the way wind sings differently through different rigging. Thin lines hiss one way, heavy rails another. The note shifts as field strength rises or falls. A mountaineer hears a higher pitch on a knife-edge ridge than on a broad shoulder. A pilot hears nothing at all inside a well-sealed cockpit. But microphones pick up the effect in radio squeal. These are subtle clues. They do not replace meters. They tune attention. A gentle dive into the why lands on one clear idea. High electric fields make it easier for electrons to leave molecules. At sharp points, fields concentrate because the geometry funnels lines of force into small spaces. Once a few electrons get free, they bump others and create small avalanches. At corona levels, those avalanches are tame, and their energy is released as pale light and faint sound. At streamer levels, they reach farther, but still lack the organization of a full lightning leader. If the environment lends a hand, if a leader descends from cloud and a streamer reaches up, the two can meet. That is lightning's doorway. St. Elmo's fire stands in the foyer, not the hallway. That picture in the mind is enough to behave well. No hard math is required. Historical testimonies provide clean anchors. A navigator on a square rigger wrote, "The tops were lit as with foxfire, but steadier. The men were cheered." A 20th century bush pilot recalled, "The glass wore a ghost edge. Never a bad night when it did. Always a careful one." A park ranger stationed near a volcano said into a recorder, "Antenna tips glowed. Hair lifted. The plume made its own lightning. We moved staff to the safer side of the ridge." These short lines, quoted as they were spoken or written, carry more teaching than a stack of abstractions. There is a natural curiosity about whether the halo leaves marks on new paint. It does not scorch on metal and clean air. It leaves no visible line in heavy salt spray. Very intense corona, over long periods, can encourage tiny corrosion spots. at sharp edges, more a matter of time and chemistry than the glow itself. Good practice rounds corners and keeps coatings sound. The best sign St. Elmo's fire leaves is a note in a log and a habit in a mind. The micro-stories return because they work. A schooner's yard glows neat and even in a rain that feels like needles. A glider's wingtip wears a violet eyelash at dusk as it glides away from a fat cloud. A volcano rim sends both soft glow and hard forks of light into the night air. And a ranger chooses a lower lookout without drama. A lighthouse lens grows a fragile ring of blue in winter and then hides it again when the keeper closes the door with a soft click. A ship's bell rope whispers a chain of tiny snaps as a front's last wind leaves the harbor. Each scene lands like a postcard that a viewer can keep. This subject can close with a small FAQ that maps curiosity onto clarity. Can St. Elmo's fire appear aboard a boat in fair weather? Yes. If local conditions raise fields, dry wind over a canyon mouth, spilling onto the water, for example. But the iconic appearances love storm edges. Can people summon it with gadgets? In labs, yes. On decks, no. It is the sky's decision. Is it evergreen? Under certain camera settings, or in the presence of other gases or aerosols, the color can skew, but to the eye it sits blue-violet. Because nitrogen rules the palette, does it hum in silence? It hums only with enough field to energize air. Silent blue under very low wind can still carry a faint hiss that ears lose under engine noise. Do animals notice? Birds and some mammals appear to respond before people do. Observations say they leave perches when rails sing and halos sit on points. The global tour takes one more lap, so viewers can build a durable mental map. In the tropical Atlantic, trade winds feed squalls that lay beads of blue on rigging at dusk. In the North Atlantic's winter lanes, lows spin and ship rails hiss while crews work in gloves under short days. Over the Great Plains, anvils grow wide. The occasional pilot reports windscreen edges drawn in delicate neon. Along the Andes and the Alps, climbers hear axes sing on ridgelines that poke into the strongest field lines. Around a Pacific arc of volcanoes, ash plumes make their own weather, and both soft and hard light share a sky. Far north and far south, dry air makes halos crisp on antenna tips at lonely stations that listen to wind and ice. Each geography teaches the same sentence in its own accent. Education closes the loop between experience and practice. Museums place a mast fragment with a painted blue line on its tip next to a simple panel that says, edges, focus fields, fields light air. Schools pair a sailor's diary page with a lab video of Corona on a wire. Airport, open houses, invite pilots to talk about the calm glow and the simple rules that keep flights easy when the sky begins to hiss. Lighthouse tours include the story of the gallery rail's winter song, and the 2 steps a keeper takes before thunderstorms close the door and write the note. Nothing here asks for fear. Everything here asks for care. The script now leans into its promised recap. A clean paragraph that a narrator can read in one steady breath. Sailors gave the blue its name because it kept them company on nights when decks were wet and knees were tired. Scientists gave it a description that fits in a pocket. A corona discharge, a gentle plasma that clings to points when the sky's electric field runs high. People can see it as a soft blue-violet glow, hear it as a faint hiss, and smell it as a clean, sharp scent. It sits on mastheads, rails, crosses, wingtips, and ice axes. It is not lightning, but it shares lightning's neighborhood. By itself it does not harm. It simply tells anyone who notices to do the simple wise things. Give storms space, treat metal kindly, and let designed paths carry energy away. In this way, a belief that once felt like blessing turns into a blueprint for calm behavior. The ending keeps the vibe warm and steady, because the ocean and the sky deserve endings that rest well. What people owe the glow is ordinary and beautiful. Attention paid in quiet moments. Checklists, trusted when rain starts to speak. Pleasure taken in a color that looks like dusk, wearing a crown. A step backward from high metal when the air turns electric. A smart route around clouds that would rather be watched from a distance than argued with up close. The blue does not demand drama. It invites good manners between humans and weather. One last quiet fact closes the door gently. The halo is the air itself, lit for a moment by the way charge passes through it. It is proof that storms can be read without being feared, that folklore can sit beside physics, and that knowledge can feel like a hand on a shoulder saying, "Easy now, you've got this."